Hey guys, how's it going? So, I just wanted to do something for fun today since I had some time. I haven't been streaming as much recently, and I've never been a big video maker for YouTube, but I thought it'd be fun to make a tier list for IS4 6-star operators at plus 15. I do want to give a quick disclaimer. This is going to be largely an opinion thing. I am not an expert on the game. I'm always willing to learn new things, and I'm sure people who play the CN server, which I am global only, have more experience with the upcoming operators. So I'm not going to be ranking the ones that aren't available on global right now. I know there will be a fourth ending eventually as well. But I just thought it'd be fun. I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on maybe operators I ranked lower or maybe too high. But I do have an in-game account. I've always really enjoyed IS and roguelike modes. Some of the harder stuff too, like CC. This mode on the last stage has been ridiculous. But to kind of give my experience with the modes, I do play, I've played Fungamist on IS2. I beat every single ending with every single squad. It's interesting to see kind of how things have changed over time because IS2 did only have three difficulties, and the third difficulty just gave you these ridiculous collectibles. But it was fun, and it's interesting to go back and see how certain units perform in previous IS modes. As far as IS3 goes, I did beat plus 15. I will say I usually one-trick people-oriented squad to the Highmore boss fight. I did do the last night a couple times. I did do the third ending and the fourth ending, I think once each at plus 15, but they were brutal. I was not a fan of the light system. I actually really like the full dartles and the, I believe it's anti-interference index. I also really like that they changed the difficulty away from the res buff, because outside of units like Texalter or res shredders, it felt so bad to use arts-based damage, whereas in IS4 they just kind of spread the love evenly, you know? But I have beaten the first ending multiple times on plus 15. I've done the second ending once. The third ending, I think I've completed on plus 13 or 14. And then I messed up my plus 15 run and haven't done it since because I was sad. I have found with, especially the first boss, if you have injury trigger, which is something I generally don't think is a huge issue most of the time, I found that you can actually insta-lose some stages later on if you aren't careful. But I do like, too, how they trim the medals. I think it's only plus 10 that it'll show it, but it kind of shows what squads I like to use. I use support squad a lot when I'm not sure, I want to test new operators. But anyways, let's move on to the tier list. Let me close my BlueStacks, too, because it's been freaking out on me recently. But just kind of give off my tiers. We're going to have core, obviously. S rank will be operators that, if I have the hope, even if I don't always have all my core operators, I will grab a lot of the time. A through D is going to be relative. I don't know if we'll use all those tiers. Excess hope / collectible specific is an odd tier. I thought about just making a niche tier in general. But in fact, let's just turn this in niche. But it's something that applies, I think, a lot more to 6 stars and higher rarity operators. I did think about doing every unit, but I realized very quickly that would take a ridiculous amount of time. And that so many 4 stars I wouldn't even rank. Like, part of the reason I wanted to maybe do 5 and 4 stars and 3 stars is, for example, I think Cardigan's really good in general. I know a lot of people prefer Spot for his ability to heal others, but I think she's always been nice just because she's tankier for the early game. And I've actually found that the best strategy, even late game, for the second boss is to run double medic, double defender, and just stall the boss out. Because there's no limitation like there is, I believe, on the first boss, where, you have to do a certain amount of DPS before enemies will continue to flow out. But kind of just moving through, non-M experience is also going to be explanatory, I'd say, but kind of going down the list. So Kautsit is strong. She's always been strong. I will say I'd probably put her in A or B tier. We'll be nice to her and put her in A tier. The main thing is, there are still collectibles, and I don't want to put her in collectible specific. That buff summons to a ridiculous amount. However, at the end of the day, when you think about dropping Kautsit and Monster, she is very expensive to deploy. Right up there with the most expensive units, and she doesn't heal other units. And unlike in previous versions where some of the better medics that I would use was in IS3, I'd use Lumen some of the time, but usually it was Telopsis or Perfumer. There's more competition because of Ea Alter. Still very good. I should also note that I don't think with the lack of a boss like the Last Night, it's also as truly important. Because last night, true damage was so important. You could also use the Golden Glow interaction somewhat specifically on that ending just because of the way her drone and S3 interacted with the last night, but I'm still just going to put Kautsit in a solid A tier. Some of these units might move over time. Chen. I really like Chen with module. Why do I have two C tiers? With module, Chen is not bad. You know, it gives her that extra regen, plus you could get things like Captain Morgan's Wine that quickly, you know, raise up your offensive defensive recovery. She can help with other operators offensive recovery, but I've also found that I don't rely as much on offensive recovery units, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw her down in D tier maybe, just because I don't think she's actually close to the worst. Something I should note, and again maybe this is another argument for boss specific, is the third boss is literally just how much can you do a DPS check in a short window, because you have that device that you can wait to overcharge or charge once, and you can only DPS that black hole looking boss during that time. So a quick burst like Chen, if you have a huge excess of hope and guard vouchers, can help with that. However, I will note I would take Molinar, Surtur, and probably Neural Alter for that case before her any day, so the chances of me having that far in advance are pretty low. Blaze. So Blaze, I've felt for a long time, is a very good unit. She's one of the OG good lane holders. I'm also going to put her in D tier, maybe above Chen, just because as much as like her module is very nice, I believe it gives her, after a certain amount of time deployment, you know, those extra stats. I believe it's status resistance, some attack speed. But I don't even use Gavial Alter as much in IS4, so I definitely cannot put Blaze higher than like D tier. Sculptor. That's a tough one. Sculptor and Bard units in general are some of your very big backup options if you're really struggling with medic vouchers. I literally had a plus 15 run that failed, actually, because I did not get a medic voucher, even a refreshing shop, all the way until the fight literally right before the boss. And it was bad. In fact, I had a plus 13 run that only succeeded because I finally, on like the 4th floor, said, I can't keep doing this, and I invested in Sculptor, and that ended up being my only source of healing for the third boss, and it was super sketchy. But I think I'll put her in B tier. Her S2 is always nice once you can get it up and running. Like, without exception, it's so good. But it's also just a very big hope investment. Shelter I'm going to put in S tier. Same issue as Kautsit. You know, spread shooters have such a high hope cost investment just to deploy, especially if you have to deploy them more than once. But Shelter is, in my opinion, still a ridiculously strong sniper. Super powerful. I mean, her S3 is there to be her S3. She's kind of like Surtur in that regard, where if she's not promoted, she's probably not going to be useful. But, you know, she's balanced around her S3 being what it is. Neural Alter. So I'm actually going to go ahead and put her in S tier as well. This might be something a lot of people disagree with because, oh, that's a sus ad. It's like a shampoo ad. Oh boy. But she's just so good. Like, people joke back when she came out about like, oh, this is what you have to get a dreadnought to be ridiculously powerful. But her S2, even unupgraded, makes her so good at dueling. She can be a big backup to Tex Alter in that regard if you're really struggling to assassinate something. Her S3 I have found is a little bit less useful because you can't block boss 1 or boss 3. And you obviously, you know, you can block boss 2, but it's not what you're probably going to be doing. But I still think she's just so good for the general game. The only reason I wouldn't, well, maybe I should rank her top of A. I take that all back, sorry, but the only reason I guess I can't put her in S, and obviously not core, is that you probably don't want her before Molinar or Surtur. Reed Alter. I have found Reed Alter to be very good. The only reason I wouldn't put her in S tier also is because of opportunity cost and the operatives before her. I always think you should take Aya Alter before her because Aya is just a ridiculously powerful medic. Spalter. I should note that you can see it in my first IS4 streams. I didn't stream a lot of my difficulty grind, but Swelter's a very versatile unit. She's one of the only units in the game. While there's a lot of units that I could make an argument for M6ing their masteries, she's one of the very, very few units that I would recommend leveling both of her modules if you can, because one works well with Abyssal Hunters S3, the other works well with S2 on more of a standalone unit. However, I have found as time goes on, I don't think that she's as strong. I think I want to put her somewhere comfortably in C tier. That feels a little bit low for me. But again, I haven't experimented with her as much. And I think something I have to note is what will drive units down in the tier list is how many units are core or S tier above them. And similar to Molinar slash Surtur, your first specialist voucher, if you have the hope, should always be Tex Alter. Gavio Alter, I'm going to throw on C tier as well. I mentioned it with Blaze. Gavio Alter was my go-to start in IS3, but that was specifically because of Out of Control and the fact she still gave that early utility and was decently usable later on if you didn't promote her. Because a lot of that niche is gone, there is this stage, I believe it's called Prisoner's Night, that you can kind of drag enemies into the hole, and some of them even run in there themselves. But it's still a little bit different. I can't say that I would use her a whole lot. Tex Alter is my favorite operator in the game. And Texas in general. That's what my model is based off of. I love her so much, and she's ridiculously broken. She obviously, as time goes on, as you go up higher, isn't going to be like, say, assassinating the third boss in 1 or 2 deployments, but she's just still so much utility. I call her the biggest band-aid unit in the game because basically if there's a problem, you plop her S2, she does a bunch of damage. You plop her S3, and she has a micro stun that stalls them for a long time. She's just too good. Exia. So anti-air is always helpful. There's actually a good number of drones, and unlike in IS3, where a lot of the flying enemies, you really just wanted to stun them, which kind of hurt Exia's viability, there's just a lot of straight-up drones. She does struggle with some of the tankier drones. I can't remember the names of stages, but the one with 3 or 4 big, giant, like, drones, planes that have the big circle around them that drop, like, the shots down. I wish I was a better describer of things. But I would still put her comfortably in C tier. She's not bad, but, she's not the greatest. Siege. Much as I love Siege, Siege is one of my top 3 characters after Texas and Neural, and I still stubbornly use her, even in, like, high-level CC sometimes. I can't put her anything above E. I feel so bad about that. W. W's another unit that, like... The problem is there's just so many snipers that are better than her. She does have some utility with the stun, the bombs. She can actually act as, like, a pseudo trap master, like Dorothy. But I also don't personally use Dorothy a whole lot either. I'm actually going to throw her down in... I mean, I have a hard time putting a whole lot down by E tier, but I'll put her at the bottom of D. It's not that she doesn't have her uses. And you could also argue, I haven't put anything in collectible specific. And I'm trying to remember, now I'm drawing a blank. I feel like I should know. I think it was Glory Pack was the name. Is that an IS4? If it is, maybe she could be an XS Hope, but even then, I just don't think you take her over so many of the snipers because there's just so many good snipers. They're not, like, as crazy in demand in IS3 because in IS3 snipers are probably the strongest voucher because you needed physical damage, but still, she's not bad. Ifrit, I think I could put comfortably in B tier. Ifrit's always a strong arts damage option. She has some shred. She's just very expensive to deploy. She's very specific in her positioning. But as always, she's been the unit that when you can place her down, and I do believe there's a good few stages that she does work on, she's not bad. Hoshi. Now, this is going to be a bit of a weird one, but I'm going to put Hoshi in boss specific. And the reason for that is, and if I had made a tier list including 3, 4, 5 stars, this would have been much more prevalent. I think that the go-to strategy for boss 2 is to ideally take 2 healers, 2 defenders, and then maybe 1 or 2 other units, like Enos and Tex Alter, that can hold the right side. Because you can stall the boss infinitely with enough healing and enough tankiness on the left side where it first spawns, with 2 of the weak trash mob enemies, not the big sword guys, that will melt that strategy instantly. But it's a very, very reliable way of doing it. What I mean by boss specific with Hoshi is, the best way I can put it is, there's relics like attack speed, the medic attack speed one, you know, extra healing, defenders, the big defender tanky bonus. That means that the more of those you have, the less I think you need to invest in powerful defenders and medics. I had a plus 15 run, or maybe it was plus 13, 14, where I actually used Ansel and Cardigan for half of that strategy. But I had Chalice, the medic 50 attack speed. I had the full Dardos, that I had 2 of like the 100 attack speed, max HP stuff. Like, it was a very powerful run, so I was able to get away with it. I will note as well, although Hoshi S2 is usually the skill I use, you don't want to do that because you don't want Hoshi to accidentally activate either the boss's phase, which probably wouldn't happen, but you don't want her to kill the early enemies that she blocks in addition to the boss, because that's how you get the sword enemies later on to completely make your strategy fall apart. Shining. I love Shining. She was my first 6-star medic. Unfortunately, I just don't think that defense is a strong enough niche. There is a decent amount of physical and arts damage in this mode, but I still don't think I could put her above E tier, again, because of opportunity cost to other medics. Silver Ash. Silver Ash isn't bad. The problem for me is, like, stealth reveal and stuff just isn't helpful because I run Enes start. So again, this might be somewhat anecdotal, but I just don't think he's that good, especially when compared to Molinar. Yes, he does have block, unlike Molinar when Molinar's skill isn't up, but it's not that hard usually to play around that, especially since, unlike in IS3, you actually can block things feasibly at plus 15, whereas in IS3 with all the Seaborn, all the elemental damage, the number of enemies that would shoot extra Seaborn at you, half the time you didn't even block things if you could avoid it. But Silver Ash has kind of fallen far for me. I could see the argument for him being a higher, but I would even just take a generic lane hold over him at this point in time, which is unfortunate. Nightingale. I feel like I should put Nightingale in boss specific or niche, just because that's kind of the existence of Nightingale. I think I actually will just put her maybe in S tier though, because there's a lot of arts damage in this mode. I mean, there's a lot of damage in general, I guess, which, you know, is fair, but the way I always rank Nightingale, you know, the way the community tends to rank her is there arts damage? If yes, she's top tier. If no, she is not. And so it really just depends on what you're doing, what pathing you're taking and stuff. But I do feel like she's, in this mode, useful enough that if you have the opportunity to take her, it's not a bad idea. That being said, I think Ea Alter is far and away the strongest medic in this mode, by far. In IS3, I felt like it was Lumen, but we didn't really have Ea Alter until the very tail end of that mode. But I've actually... her global heal is a fun skill, don't get me wrong. I've actually been a big fan lately of her S1. Just because it makes her like Ansel on steroids. The exact reason that Ansel is better than Hibiscus is the chance to heal extra units and the extra range. Her S1 is very powerful, and I was actually shocked by that. Heliger's E tier. I'm sorry, my guy. I love some of the enmity units, and this is one thing where I also think I diverge from a lot of other high-level players, because I know a lot of people like Highmore start sometimes, even at higher difficulties. I do not like investing in 5 or 6 stars if I do not think they will have some purpose, either ridiculous purpose in the early game, or a lot in the late game. But Heliger has fallen far, and funnily enough, he's also one of my early 6-star units that I just never raised. Rosa. So I think Rosa is underrated. I used her a lot in IS2 back in the day because of what was available to us. The problem is we have Typhon. Her S3 is a really fun skill. I was really disappointed in IS3 because I thought it'd be good for last night, and then I found out because the little grappling hook that she sticks into him takes damage, she just froze instantly and the grappling hook broke. However, I think I'd still place her on W tier. I do think she's a very strong unit. The problem ultimately is I don't think you will be using her unless you have Typhon. And that's just ultimately the issue. KOB. I personally think that KOB is one of the better casters, funnily enough, for if you are trying to invest in a caster for boss DPS. Which, unfortunately, is not likely to be the case. Even though there's not that same restriction against casters, I just don't think you'll use them as a whole lot. I would put her in Ifrit tier. I would actually put her maybe above Ifrit, just because it's easier to use her. I haven't messed around with all our modules. I'm in the end game where modules are like super scarce. So there's a lot of modules I haven't tested and I wish I could. But KOB is a solid choice. Funnily enough, in the current event that I pointed out, she's used in a lot of strats. I always try to find my own strat. I'm at S1 right now. That works, and then I see what other people do because I'm interested. And I think it was Kiostin V that was actually using her a lot. Used her alongside I think I want to say he definitely used Molinar and used Surtur, but those units it makes sense. Nian, she's not bad. I don't know if I'd put her in boss specific the same way I did Hoshi, but to be honest, that is my feeling on almost all of the defenders that are not named Soraya. Is, like you're using them if you don't have the healing or capability with defenders to hold the lanes and you want to play for block, which I, again, just like arts damage, I think is so cool you can actually do an IS4 at top difficulty. Um, he has some strangely like great utility and stuff too. The thing to keep in mind though with the defenders that you're using in boss 2 ending is they'll be perma frozen. That is one thing I forgot to mention with the boss 2 infinite stall double defender double medic strat is they will not be using their skill unless it's a passive, which is actually why I mentioned you don't use Hoshi S2 on that stage. That being said, I still just feel like I would maybe put her in boss specific or niche. I have used her a few times and it has worked really well, but I'm actually gonna put her in niche. That might be a weird one. Um, Dusk. Dusk was one of the earlier 6 stars I got as well. I remember Arknights. I've mentioned Starl I played from the very start, so it's interesting to see that game hit a year anniversary. Genshin I started a few months in on the Eula banner. Arknights I started a good while in as well. Um, but I do remember the Dusk banner. I love playing Dusk, but I just can't put her above E tier, I don't think. She has some good stalling potential. I don't remember what both of her modules do, but I know one of them is you have to feed kills to her or the freelings. And her S3 is always a very powerful, almost infinite stall tool, but she costs a lot to deploy, and it's usually just not worth it. And that's ultimately the crux of like D and E tier is there's either better options or I just don't think it's worth it, and I'd even take a budget option instead. We'll maybe throw it in the middle for now. Ling is Ling. I mean, I don't really know what to say about it. I could make her own tier. Everyone always could in these tier lists. Um, there are still summon, collectibles that can be really good. I don't know if there's the ones that ignore deployment limit, if I'm trying to remember. But the problem with Link always has been, and all summoners, is generally speaking, if you have the ability to use all your other operators as you wish, they're probably stronger than just the summons. But if you want to do Link start, it can be really good, especially if you want Defender Supporter Squad for the second ending. But it's so niche for me. I've never been a big Link gamer. Soraya. So this might shock some people. I think a lot of people do have her very high up for this event. I put her in core. I don't want to overstuff the core tier list, but quick spoiler, there's only going to be 2 more units that I'm going to put in there. I think Soraya is just too good. For S2, despite funnily enough not being considered the best skill, is very, very helpful for keeping your units alive. Unlike Spot, she doesn't have to stop attacking, she doesn't have to stop doing what she's doing, and her S3 is good amplification in certain circumstances. I just think Soraya has always been a very good crutch unit. It's just, again, I think the reason people didn't rate her highly in IS3 was because you just didn't block most of the time. Gnosis. So I should note, Gnosis is one of the very few units that I do not actually have. I will say, however, funnily enough, my very first plus 15 clear, I got a temporary Gnosis on the 3rd battle of the 1st floor, and he's nuts. I think you could argue that he's collectible specific, excess hope specific, I think I'm going to put him there. Because his CC is very powerful, even without collectibles or other relics, he does very well when his S3 is up for stalling. However, there's some collectibles that just put Gnosis on another level for stalling. Mostima. Mostima with module specifically is very good. It lowers her cost and it gives her the global slow. I'm going to throw in boss specific actually. Her S3 on the second boss, I keep mentioning the second boss for boss specific because it's the only one that isn't like a huge DPS check in my opinion. um, is very, very strong because she not only has the global slow, but her S3 actually pushes back the boss while he's in that stealth quick run mode, which can buy you some time. If you are just doing the full defender medic strat, there are 4 very comfortable points, if not 5, and you need 4 to stop the boss at, but it's worth noting that she can really push him back at least once during skill and save you an entire cycle of him getting further on. Bagpipe. Bagpipe used to be arguably the strongest 6-star Vanguard. That's not the case anymore. I'm going to throw her in C tier because she's still a solid unit. But again, I don't think I can put her in like this tier of units in good conscience. But I would never take her, you know? Auk. I don't have any experience with Auk. I do have Auk. He's only like S1, I think 70 or 80. All my experience with Auk, though, is I once threw a run in IS2 because I got a temporary one and I shot a squishy unit with it. It's just so weird for me because he has very powerful buffs, but they have to go to, you know, a tankier unit or a unit that's being given tankiness. Otherwise, they just die. Magellan, I'm going to throw in with Wing. In IS3, people were even using Mayor for certain summoner strats. Summoners are just, I think they always will be niche. And they'll have more of use sometimes in IS because you might not be doing solo clears, which are also a niche for the rest of the game, but they can be very, very powerful if they come at the right time. Phantom, I'm putting in E tier. I actually don't own Phantom. He's the only recruitment operator I don't have, but I have used him because I was curious in comparison to Texalter off like the starting friend temporary recruitment. It's not that he's a bad unit. It's that Texalter and Kirinyato are so much better. And that's kind of the state of power creep too. People always joke about power creep in Genshin and Starro already. It is pretty bad in Arknights despite how much I love this game. I used to use Project Red in IS2 to give you guys an idea. I just can't put Phantom higher than E. I guess he's probably stronger than some of these operators. It's just, again, why would you ever use him over Texalter or Kirinyato? There's just no reason. Skadi. I gotta put her in E tier as well. Maybe about here. I like using Skadi. She has the module that turns her into a, like, half, like, around, I'd say, the redeployment time of an agent unit. The problem ultimately is, as powerful as her S3 can be, it's just not the best dueling ability in the game that you can use. It just doesn't work. Mountain. So I actually recently E2'd my mountain because I've been saving up vouchers and stuff, but I realized I could still get Virtuoso and Viviana E2'd while having a decent amount of resources. Mountain's always been decent. I'm actually going to throw him in not enough experience, though. Because I know you can use his S2, I know he can hold lanes well, but I don't necessarily want to throw him in low tiers because I don't know a whole lot about him and using him. But, again, why would you ever take Mountain over... Literally, he would be at least my 4th choice unless he was a temporary recruitment because of other guards. Angelina. So, I keep referencing IS3 more than IS2 and IS1, but there was a niche strat with, like, Last Night and I think Highmore with, like, Angelina Weedy that you could push them into the gap, but it was almost never worth the investment because of how useful they were elsewhere. I think I'm just still going to throw her in niche. I don't know exactly how she interacts with a lot of collectibles, so I can't put her in that tier. Thorns. I'm going to put Thorns in niche as well, actually. Thorns is one of those units at lower difficulties in IS can literally just solo carry a run by being the best lane holder. The problem is ultimately that he falls off. Even though it's not just the pure arts damage stuff, it's nice that he has mixed damage with Destreza and stuff, but he does fall off pretty hard, I'd say. Fia Meta. If Fia Meta did not have such an awkward, like, we talked about Ifrit's awkward attack range, Fia Meta, especially S3, is even more so, and she has her own health drain mechanic. And the problem with that is there's a lot of the injuries you can get, like injury trigger. She can't kill herself with her talent, I don't believe, but if you put yourself to 1 HP and anything breathes on you, you die. And it also, even if you do try to invest in her and use her, she absorbs the time of a lot of your healers that might need to be used on other units. So I'm going to put her around W tier because she is still a very powerful DPS when you can use her. It doesn't feel great. Mudrock. I love Mudrock, but I think she really peaked in IS and IS2, to be honest. The problem with enmity units is a lot of times they need so much investment. Not that I don't think she has a module. Now I'm on the spot, I'm wondering. But the problem is ultimately if they can't use their own talents to keep up with the damage, the elemental damage and stuff, they can't do their job. And it costs so much to deploy Juggernauts. So I think I can put her in D tier. I don't think I can put her in E tier. I think she's still very useful. It's just I would always take Sarai over her. Lee, I have no experience with Lee. All I know is that he has a lot of like status resistance, which worked really well against last night. But, you know, I don't know if I'd still say I'd use them ever. Arketo. I personally think that Arketo is just worse than Exia. I know that even way back when people described, their DPS comparisons, and it was she does more damage than Exia if she's hitting more than one unit, which can happen in a lot of the stages. The problem ultimately is that if you're taking a heavily invested anti-air unit, you need them to do just so much more. So I'm going to throw her in the bottom of D tier. I don't think she's bad. I don't know if I'd place her in the tier with all these almost unusable 6 stars, but I still would never use her, to be honest. Schwarz. So Schwarz was the MVP for IS3. You either use Schwarz or Pozemka. Very, very strong, but I have found that it is kind of hard to use her. You can use her pretty easily, I'd feel like, on the left side lane hold for the first boss. The second boss just depends on where you choose to hold him. And the third boss is, I believe you can't find a spot to use her. Well, so I should note, I usually do the third boss on the bottom point. He basically moves compass points north, east, southwest. You could probably use her in other spots, but I found with the timing, the bottom spot is personally the best place to do it. So, because of that, I can't use her. But I genuinely don't think she's bad. Anytime you can work with her attacks range, she's very strong. I'll maybe put her on Blaze tier. In fact, I'm almost tempted to put Chen into boss specific again just because of the third boss. It'd be a point where I'd have 4 or 5 6-star guards. Surtur is probably she's S tier. I do think Molinar is stronger for the third boss, but you can always throw either of them into the first boss or the second boss at any point and just have them do their job. Surtur is Surtur. I actually think the CN tier list still has her as like the first or second strongest unit in the game. However, IS does really strongly skew things. So I'd actually say she's stronger than Chalter. She's probably going to be at the top of S tier. Yeah, let's see. So Suzerain is, I'd say solidly A or S tier. Like Reed Alter, even though Reed Alter is literally a medic, she does provide healing. She provides the art's fragility, which can be very powerful. And a big thing with her is that there's not a whole lot of 6-star supporters, especially if you're not a Ling gamer, that I feel like you take. We talk about Skulter even being somewhat mid because of the fact that if you're using S2, which I believe you probably would be, she needs that time to get it set up, and even then, she might get taken down if she doesn't have another healer working with her and though she's healing. But I'm going to put Suzerain maybe here. As a secondary healing option, I think Reed Alter is stronger. I think Reed Alter is actually pretty good in this mode. The problem is that Reed Alter does need something to attack, whereas Suzerain needs her S3 active. I actually think supporters can be really fun to use. Shamare and Telopsis are both good debuffers, but I've actually even raised, funnily enough, Quirkus because of the way that class is usually terrible, right? They do a little bit of arts damage when their skill is not active, and they heal when it is. But Quirkus specifically has an unlimited, I believe it's S1, so you can literally just say, I'm turning you into a healer for right now, or I'm just going to use you for a little bit of damage. Obviously not optimal, but supporters and defenders tend to be your backup options for healing if you're really getting messed over on vouchers. Saga. Saga's not bad. She's really good at... She's not bad at lane holding, The big thing with Saga is she's one of those units that's very good at feeding SP into units that might have a hard time with it because of the way she basically leaves them. I think it's wounded, and then they just slowly walk forward. I just don't think I'd use her a lot of the time. I think I'd put her on Bagpipe. Um, you'd use Bagpipe maybe for more assassination purposes, single target damage, as well as, some of that hope gain. Or not hope, sorry, DP gain. Whereas you use Saga to kind of feed SP to another unit. Not a terrible niche, just not something that I would use a whole lot. Golden Glow. I like Golden Glow. I think I'm going to throw in B tier, though. Maybe around KO Bay level, maybe a little bit higher. The problem with Golden Glow, she doesn't have an interaction. Even though arts damage is stronger in IS4 than it was in IS3, she doesn't have a specific interaction like she did with the last knight. And I found that targeting is very awkward, especially on the first boss. Because, her S2 actually can be somewhat underrated, but on the third boss, she's probably just going to be hitting trash mobs, not the boss, which is where you'd want her damage concentrated, ideally. On the first boss, she hits the icicles a lot until they're all gone. I don't know why, because the icicles don't move, so I wouldn't think they'd count as first priority, but I've literally caught her hitting the icicles before the boss as well, which is a problem. Rose Montes. Funnily enough, I don't think Rose Montes has the same issue where it's like, oh, she can't hit aerial units like the Seaborn, so I wouldn't use her. But it's still opportunity cost. She is a strong unit. I haven't used her a whole lot in my time, but if I remember correctly, she can add extra block. Again, I'm not an expert. This is just for fun. But I feel like I'd place her either not enough experience, because I've only tested her a couple times, and that was at like plus 13, 14. Extra block doesn't hurt on a lot of stages. It's just, again, why would you ever take her over Chalter or Typhon? And that's really what's filled out the C through E tier for me, is just, again, that opportunity cost. I think I'll throw her at the bottom of D, but there's an argument for me just putting her in not enough experience or E. Irene. I like using Irene. The Levitate isn't the worst ability in the world. However, she's offensive recovery, which does hurt her. Sometimes I just gotta think about these units. I don't think she's bad. Like, I can't put her in E tier. I feel like my D tier is becoming massive. But I really do feel like she sticks around this tier as well, where, like, I guess if you have a super excessive guard voucher, she can work. But guards and snipers in particular are pretty competitive vouchers in this mode. Weedy is always going to be niche. I don't really know what to say aside from that. I can't remember if she interacts, again, super specifically with some collectibles. But I don't recall there being... I mean, just thinking about the bosses, though, there's not... Like, it wasn't even worth it. It was funny to push the Last Knight or Highmore into the hole, but it wasn't really worth it because you needed so much investment. There are weight limit collectibles, so I guess you could put her in collectible specific. The problem is that, again, one of the bosses is a giant, like, big sad lock style boss that you're not going to be moving. The second boss runs really fast, and I can't remember what exactly types of CC, like Mostima, works against him, but you're probably not going to use that. And then the third boss is also just a DPS check. So she's niche, and even then there's an argument for her just being outright E. Horn. Horn was one of the MVPs from IS3 that fell pretty far. She's always been a strong unit, but I don't feel like a lot of the stages here allow her to shine. She was ridiculously powerful on the fourth ending and the first ending of IS3. She didn't exist during IS2, but I've used her back in hindsight. Well, no, she did towards the end, now that I think about it. Because I remember seeing meme attack speed builds with her, where she one-shot Phantom. I still don't think I can place her too. I'd actually put her solidly in B tier. She's always going to be a very solid unit. I just don't think that she's super usable on enough stages, and that makes it a problem. She is good when she has any operator like these two that has a very specific attack pattern is always going to be dependent on what stages are available in the current IS. Lumen. Lumen was my go-to medic if I had the hope in IS3. He's just not, compared to Alter and IS4. The problem I've found with Lumen is that his S3, right, is nice for healing some statuses, but a lot of these units don't have, like, self-stuns or anything like that. And in fact, it doesn't matter at all on the second boss where you want maybe 2 invested medics because his S3 just heals the frozen and then the defender gets frozen immediately by the boss again anyways. I do think I could put him comfortably high though just because of how powerful his healing is. It just it really is just the problem that like why would you ever take Lumen over A Alter in this mode? And then if you do take him, it's probably only for the second boss, maybe the third, if you need and have the hope to get 2 invested medics. And even then, I think sometimes it's just better to have a secondary healer option. I'll put him at the bottom of A, but there's definitely an argument for him being lower. Evan Holes. I think Evan Holes is really bad. Um, I don't really know what to say aside from that. It's not like just the entire subclass. It's not as bad as say, I guess like the Crusher subclass. I don't know how good Hoder is going to be. I still feel really awkward about the fact that I made the Crusher video just for fun and then realized afterwards, yes, Hoder is coming up in like a couple months from that point. It's like that was like 3 months ago. But I don't think he does the same thing Hoder supposedly does, where he kind of makes the clash viable, almost in the same way Neural Alter did. Like the best thought I could think would be like maybe if you wanted to try and hold up his charge shots to burst the third boss during that window. The problem is there's so many enemies, there's like over 100 in that stage, that the chance of him being able to reliably hold that and not just blast something, I don't even know if you could do. Dorothy. I actually am going to throw Dorothy in collectible specific. That might be incorrect. It's kind of hard for me sometimes on the spot. Like I can look at the page, right, and talk about all the interactions. But, you know, with my limited experience, again, this is all going to be anecdotal as it will for, I think, most players. I think that she can be really good with collectible specific. The problem is with a lot of operators that consume DP like Lee or other merchants or like, you know, trap masters is that you're always going to have Tex Alter, which is also going to be eating DP. And so there's that. Posey. Posey, like Horn, I think fell off pretty hard compared to IS3. I do still think she's better than Horn. But it's funny too, because Schwarz, Horn, and Posey, I would have put probably all in S tier if we were making an IS3 plus 15 tier list. As it stands, I think I can still comfortably put Posey in A tier. It's hard to compare units, right, that are of completely different roles. But I would probably, if given the choice, right, again, situation specific, I would probably take Posey or over Kautsit or Lumen, just because she's still very strong. The typewriter makes her flexible. Always a very good unit. Molinar's core. I would argue Tex Alter is still #1 core for me, not just because I'm biased and she's my favorite unit. She's just too strong. I'll put Molinar second, maybe. He is obviously your main DPS for the third boss. However, I've actually found that in the first boss, you don't necessarily need him, because on the first boss, you basically need left side lane holding, not as much right side lane holding. Sometimes, depending on collectibles, Tex Alter can deal with the right side alone. Other times, you may need a secondary medic, even like Ansel and a lane holder. And always the issue with Molinar is either you need to time his skill correctly, or you need to use maybe a defender behind him. I would not be surprised if most people still put Molinar as #1 because of how much damage he does. However, with my personal playstyle, which is to generally hold lanes at specific points and then drop everything else I need on their heads, I still think I'd put him second. Surtur and Molinar, I think, are big MVPs alongside Neural Alter if you're trying to use guards to bust down the third boss, though. Just because of that immediate burst. Penance. I actually really like Penance too, but I think she's better than Mudrock. She doesn't have the innate healing in her kit that Mudrock does, but her barrier generation is also so powerful. Both of them do well with like Captain Morgan's Wine, the collectibles that give them recovery, but it's worth noting Mudrock's self-sustain comes off of her barriers being broken, or, you know, usually use S2, so it's every, like, she doesn't really need those defensive recovery collectibles because she only needs to take 4 hits to spin anyways. It can be nice. Whereas Penance, on the other hand, relies really heavily on killing trash mob enemies and then using her S3 to bonk elites. I still think I would rate her higher than Mudrock, and maybe a few of these units, maybe about here. I like Penance. I have tried her a good few times. The problem is I've found any unit that takes a ridiculous amount of DP cost investment, especially one that's melee that might have to be redeployed multiple times, can just, even hope cost aside, can just not be worth it in the stage. I have almost no experience with Stainless. I really like the subclass, actually. I think it's super fun, and you can do so many cool things with his machines, but I don't own him and I don't have any experience. Eunectis, I think, is... She's a weird duelist. Like, she's that weird defender niche that's almost like, the role Scotty fills, except more expensive, but I think arguably tankier. Her SD is really cool, but I just don't think I'd use her very often. I don't know if I'd put her below these units. Maybe we'll put her around Scotty. Flametail is always going to be collectible specific. I was not a big fan of Flametail investment with like Glorious Cashmere's in IS3, and I am still not a big fan of it in IS4. But I do want to put it in there because I know a lot of people are, and it can be very strong, especially with the RNG of those dodge collectibles. Although I do think it's like 70% chance or something like that, isn't it? Or no, maybe it was... Actually, now I'm missing out on it. To be fair, though, you can also get things like Dancer's Bracelets, a couple of the other dodge collectibles. If you have the super specific collectible set, you can have a nearly immortal lane holder. It's just, so specific. Blemmy, I've always thought that Blemmy is underrated. I do not, however, think I would take her very often. Sleep is such a specific niche to have with S2, or S3 is nice and all, but... I think I'll throw her maybe at the bottom of C tier. I don't think she's bad. Just the fact that she has the utility to heal other units. Although obviously I put Soraya in core, and a good number of medics highly rated in this mode. Any form of secondary healing can be very, very useful in the right situation. Carnelian, I actually almost want to put her in niche or collectible specific, just because every operator that has any kind of recovery, auto, or offensive defensive can be much better. With those collectibles, like she could be popping off more often, but it is still Carnelian. I feel like similar to Siege for me, unless you really like her, you're not going to try and make her work. Vigil, I don't have much experience with either. I do own him because he was welfare. I feel like I should put him in niche just because of the way the tactician subclass works, and the same reason I put in summoners is he can be very powerful early game. I just don't know why you would start with him over Enos if you want a Vanguard. Fartooth is a weird one that I also just don't have much experience with. The global long line shot is cool and all, but I just, we talk about how hard it can be to make Ifrit work, and Ifrit does a lot more damage than Fartooth does. She's not global range, and she also has one line. I'm also going to throw her an E, though. But there's a good number of these, though, genuinely. I'm curious to see what people's opinions are, because some people just really love some operators, and they use them more. Mizuki. Mizuki with the module is actually not bad. The problem ultimately is, again, what specialist do you take ahead of Mizuki? And Mizuki also, suffers from the same issue of Molinar, of like, if the unit doesn't block and is a ground unit, you need some way to keep them in their range. I know that Mizuki has the slow with module, but that is ultimately the problem. I'm going to throw him at the bottom of C tier because I do think he's decent if you can have the right conditions. And I don't know if I would say it's hope or collectible specific for that to happen. I know, again, there's minus movement speed, minus weight limit stuff, but I think weight limit's a little bit more important when it comes to that. Ash. I don't know how I feel about Ash, to be honest. I mean, I almost feel like I'd rank her somewhere around Arketo. I haven't used her a whole lot in my time. I'm actually really excited that we're getting more R6 collab units here in a bit. I think we're getting Ayla and Iana. I haven't played R6 in a few months again now, but that was one of the only FPSs I was really good at. I loved playing Iana when I came back. I loved playing Azami. Before then, I was always like a Valk main, Bandito, Dorito, But that's a random tangent. But again, anti-air units, you're probably taking Typhon, so you really need a really good argument for them, and it's not that they're bad, but yeah, I don't know. Passenger was Godsinger if you had Hand of Diffusion and IS2, and I feel like that combination just slowly became worse the longer the game went on. It's not ever bad, but again, he's a hard to deploy unit because of how much the DP costs, and I actually do really highly value again, even as an Enos start player, I strongly value units that are more in like the teens or 20s range that can do the same job as opposed to units that cost 30 plus. So I'm still going to throw him in collectible specific because if you get Hand of Diffusion, there's always an argument to use him. He's still probably the best user for it, but you know, there's that. Gladia is going to be one that I think a lot of people disagree on. I think that she is probably around A tier. And the reasoning for that is she has some of the other Abyssal Hunters have similar, SP regen, HP regen talents and stuff, but I have found that she is a very, very, very good secondary specialist option as a Band-Aid unit because she can hold that straight line. She has her Tornado. She has the pulling capability for some early stages. Again, the self-regen. She's really good at holding lanes behind a defender. And even more so than anything else, one thing I've found is on this stage where you have a bunch of the tree units that have the erosion aura that just does poison-like damage around them, and it pops in a bunch of the big drones. It pops in, I think, two of those little monolith-looking things that spin out the spitting sawn blades. She's a really good backup option for that, especially if you don't have Molinar. She's obviously nowhere near Molinar's damage, and I know most people probably wouldn't rate her this highly, but I think of the Abyssal Hunters, in most other modes, Spalter is the strongest standalone. In this mode, I really, really have been using Gladia a lot. In fact, I'd put her over Lumen. Scylla. I mean, the problem with Scylla is and always has been, if you're using a flag bearer, you're either using them for buffs, like Elysium for snipers, or you're using them, I guess she does have the debuff on S3, or you're using them to generate DP. And if you really, really want a flag bearer to generate DP, why would you not spend 4 less hope and get Myrtle? And again, even then, why would you not just use Enos? Enos is too strong not to put in core, not to use. Unless you don't have her, I guess. I'm actually going to put her... E tier in general, I don't have super structured. I think we'll bump Silver Ash up. I think that might actually make a lot of people angry that I have him so low. But I just don't think he's that good. I know there, even when Molinar came out, there were a lot of OG Silver Ash defenders that really wanted to say he was just as good. He still has block during stuff. The stealth reveal to me is useless, though, because Enos is such a high priority unit. And so it's like, I think he gives, like, what, redeployment time, I guess, and low buff to other units. He's not terrible. I don't think there's a reason to use him, and Guard is and always has been probably one of the most populated vouchers in general. There are so many 6-star guards and subclasses. Palace is a weird one. I actually really like the idea of the instructor subclass, the idea of buffing a unit ahead of them, but it's just how often do you find a situation where that's truly helpful? For example, when I hold the left lane, part of the reason my Soraya's core is I don't even have to throw a medic unless I'm really struggling in that left lane. I can throw Soraya in there, have maybe my Typhon. I put like Soraya, my Typhon on the left lane. I throw Enos sometimes behind her, throw Gladia behind her. She's also in range to heal like Surtur or Molinar in front of the first boss tile. So like where would you put Palace? You know, you'd replace the Enos tile, you'd replace the Gladia tile, and it's just not worth it. I'd have to read up more on like her buffs. I know she buffs like I don't know if it's a specific race or a specific like section. I don't know if it's I want to say Minoan or something. I'm terrible with names, but great with faces and pictures. I just don't know if I can put her higher than this. Jianghu, I don't have enough experience. I think he's a really cool unit. I did try to get him. I did not, however, have enough they're not called wishes, but vouchers and stuff at the time to get him, and I was kind of bummed out. He's the only Sui sibling I'm missing. I've heard he's pretty decent. I highly doubt he's anywhere above like mid-tier, but I don't have any experience with him. I'm actually going to put Lin in niche. The same reason I was talking about Carnelian. With the correct... In fact, I'll put her in collectible specific. Again, she's probably not worth the investment most of the time. Because, you know, like, I think it's Liberator guards like Molinar or the Phalanx casters and stuff. They obviously don't do anything. The big reason I'd put her in collectible specific, though, is there is Hand of Purification, which does damage constantly to enemies in range for, I think it's Therapists, Phalanx casters, and Bards. And of those three, I believe Phalanx casters are probably the strongest users. They don't have the biggest range like Therapist medics, but it still can be very, very interesting. Chibai. I think that Chibai is actually really underrated. I think that she is stronger than Thorns in this mode. I think that she is probably stronger than Silver Ash in this mode. There is, of course, the RNG on Binding, and she's not got the most damage, but I have always been a fan of the Lord subclass. That being said, I feel like if I put her higher than D tier, a lot of people would disagree. However, I do genuinely think she's stronger than a lot of these D tier units. She's just one of those units for me that isn't going to be your solo carry. She's not going to be your Thorns that just gets Disgrace the second active at low difficulties and lane holds everything. In fact, a big issue with Thorns is actually that he just doesn't have time in a lot of stages to get Disgrace up twice. That's one thing I've noticed a lot, is if you don't have an offensive or defensive recovery collectible or like Chen, he doesn't get second Disgrace up that often, which is weird because there's still like 40-some enemies in a lot of the early stages, but I've found that to be a really big problem. Kira Yato has to be S tier. Again, I'm somewhat biased, but I do genuinely think that Texalter is almost always the slightly superior option, but Kira Yato is very, very, very strong. I guess I could put her here. If you have one over the other, or you prefer one over the other, it's not bad. I think a big part of what makes Texalter stronger is, Kira Yato does have a lot more upfront quick burst damage. However, Texalter has the skill reset, she has the micro stun, her S2 is very, very powerful. And the thing with both of their S2s that's sometimes a problem is whether or not they die before they finish out that DPS. Texalter obviously takes longer, especially if she gets the skill reset. But Kira Yato does it very, very fast, but she increases taunt level. She's still, however, ridiculously powerful. Ines is core. Ines is my go-to starting unit. I'd put her maybe third here. Soraya is definitely the unit here that could be bumped down one. But I just think Soraya is such a powerful option in this mode. Again, A is the best medic. These are the 5 units I will have in core. These two I think are always going to be number 1 and 2 in IS for some time to come unless they get power crept somehow. Ines is a ridiculous powerful unit. If you get the extra enemy that is the duck, honestly, or the stealth enemy, if she's E2'd, she reveals stealth. That's basically a free collectible almost every single time with her binding. Her binding, her S2, her S3 is decent burst, but I almost always use S2. She's just so strong. And she also hits area units, which is something that like Molinar S2, for example, doesn't do if he's not promoted. She's just ridiculous. I was really happy that we finally got Ines as an operator in the game, because she's one of those that's been anticipated for a long time, and she really did live up to the hype. She is ridiculous. Huolhiak. I actually feel like I'd say collectible specific. I think Levitation is a really powerful form of CC, right up there with, like, say, Gnosis Frozen. And I do believe there are collectibles that affect that. I could be wrong, and if I am, she needs to be in a different place. But, like, one of the weird things with her Tornado, for example, is that it looks like it'd be AoE and it hits 1 unit. However, again, Levitate is a very strong ability, and I found in Stationary Security Service, where you swap out units and they get buffs based on the previous unit, she can actually get ridiculous with the right setup. And for that reason, I'd have to imagine with the correct collectibles, she'd also be ridiculous here. Meowsys is just weird. I'd say she's niche. A lot of my niche units, as you can probably tell, are either like a really weird effect like Neon S3, Levitate, weird utility, pushing, or they're units that summon other units, which can be powerful, but it just, again, if you have the ability to use and deploy efficiently, an entire operator over the summon, even with some of the summon-based collectibles, I just don't know if you would do it. Silence the Paradigmatic I thought was going to be a really cool unit with the way her S3 works. And I did talk about how I believe it's the Abjure subclass can be really good at providing extra healing if you need. I just don't know that I could put her super high. I actually did mess around with her a lot for a while when she came out, and I wasn't super impressed. I think I'm going to throw her in her niche, just because one thing I have found is on the third boss, you can really run into the issue of someone just dying. Like if you're using, say, like I'll position at the bottom of that map, and I'll throw Molinar, Surtur, sometimes Neuro Alter. I'll have Typhon positioned to hit with S2 as well, or even S3. And if you're not careful and one of them dies during that spot, it's very easy without multiple operators being on to not hit the first or second phase in one even double overcharged device time frame, which is a huge issue. Exeg Alter. I know some people really like Exeg Alter. The biggest problem I have with him is he's one of those units that to perform needs ridiculous investment. He's probably one of the units that perform at a top level, wants to be level 90, E290. He needs this module to really function. I like the subclass. I use La Pluma and I use Timor a decent amount, but again, guards are ridiculously competitive. You have Molinar and Surtur, and in my opinion, Nur Alter over him every single time. I've seen a lot of people say that depending on their setup, you can have him solo hold the left side by himself on the first boss. The problem is the left side is, with the way the map is structured, the right side is just like a squiggly, like S type shape, like a snaky shape. And so, whereas the left side actually holds the opening to the boss DPS spot, it holds the opening to a huge amount of the shield guards and stuff. I highly doubt, even invested without good collectibles, he could hold that lane by himself at plus 15. And even then, he's just one of those units that I feel like if you have to invest that much in for him to perform a job, honestly, maybe slightly above average for a 6-star guard, it's not even worth it. I remember someone, I felt bad, was like, in one of my videos, I showed that at the time my Exalter was like level 57 with no module, because what I'll do is I'll bookmark all the units I'm going to raise to a certain level and then give them levels for like the daily quest so I don't run out of resources. And they were like, man, that looks so unsatisfying. But like, I have him at E260, and I know his performance spikes rapidly with module. I just don't think I'd use him. I personally am not a fan of using enmity units and IS in general. I think the worst of the four was IS3. However, and I did use them, I guess, a little bit in IS2, but I don't know. I guess I'll put him in not enough experience. I really don't think I'd rate him higher than D or E. However, I don't have his module raised up completely, so I guess I can't say that he's top tier. And I did lie, I just realized Typhon is here. I'm going to throw Typhon in core as well. I'll maybe throw her around here. I think that she's a very, very powerful unit. I mentioned in IS2, I crutched, and you can even see the streams, I think. I crutched really hard on Rosa for the puppets on the right side of the Lucian fight. Her S2 is basically just better Rosa S2. Her S3 isn't like a CC thing, but it's a weird ability to use. I've almost always fallen back on S2, but it's very, very, very powerful. I do realize that I have 6 units in core here right now and 4 in S. The thing ultimately is, for me, that in IS4, I think what I mean by core is you can get away with not having maybe 1 or 2 of these a lot of the time, outside of maybe the third ending. But anytime I'm given one of these vouchers, I will take them if I can. And that's what I mean by core. I have a specialist here, I have a guard, a vanguard, a medic, a sniper, and a defender. I do not have a caster, because I just don't. And I don't have a supporter in here. But that is ultimately my point, is these are probably the top performing units of each class. I would say, like, I guess I could even just put top performer of class. Just because I genuinely view it that way. Surtur is like, and in so many of these cases, you do want multiple units of the same class. It's just, who is my top priority for that voucher? Oh, this is regular Aya. That's awkward. Anyway, I didn't even think about that. So Aya Alter obviously goes here. That's awkward. A regular Aya is a good caster. I maybe throw her around KOB Golden Go level. I just don't value casters very highly. I do think it's worth noting that, again, she is an option for high burst and a short window or third boss. I think the problem just is that positioning on ranged units can be a bit awkward if you stop them where I do. And again, that's anecdotal, but I tend to stop the boss at the bottom, because what I found is he goes north, east, southwest. You can hold him, I believe by the time it overcharges, it's either the second round on east or the second round on south. I do it on the second round at south, ideally try to one phase it, and then by the time it goes full circle to south again, that's actually right as it goes to overcharge again on the device. So because of that, I haven't experimented as much with holding him at, say, again, north, east, or west. I think east and west would also work reasonably well, depending on what you're doing. But holding him at south puts very few tiles to put specific ranged units. I wish I could pull up the map here, but I don't know where I'd find one. But like, that's part of the reason why I put Typhon where I do on the left side, next to maybe my Aya Alter, because then Aya Alter can heal Typhon, she can heal where I put Molinar, actually. It's just a bit of a weird situation, because that's where I think she would theoretically shine the most, is that quick burst. I do not think that... I had someone come into my chat, actually, when I was playing IS4 and ask if he should use actually Lee or Swire Alter. I like Swire Alter in terms of unit design. I just don't think she's very good. I really do not. I think that when it comes to a fast redeploy unit, to be in the business, not even just specialty vouchers, fast redeploy in general, if I'm going to take you, and this is what hurts Phantom so badly, you need to have a legitimate reason for me to use you over Tex Alter or Kirinyato, and there just isn't. I don't think she's a bad unit. I guess I could put her in like maybe high. I guess I could put her next to Phantom. The thing is, she drains DP as well as a merchant. With the way her coins and stuff work, it actually works off that talent, and it's just a bit odd. Jessica Alter is a unit that I kind of wish I hadn't pulled. I had a lot of wishes saved up, so I went ahead and pulled on her. And I kind of wish I just saved it to maybe get some extra cons on Viviana and Virtuosa coming up, because I had to go to the hard limit, which ate up almost all of my savings. I have like 40 wishes saved up now. Not wishes, but you know what I mean. She's an interesting unit. I like the idea. She's also a unit that I don't believe her shield, kind of like Posey Typewriter, doesn't actually take up a deployment limit, and it has some interesting utility with their kit. Where I put those summoners and stuff niche is because their units take up that extra deployment slot. I do know, again, summons, the buff summons, a couple of those collectibles still exist. I do not believe they kept these summons no longer required deployment slots. I cannot recall seeing it, and it was really busted when it was there. So I guess I'll put her around D tier. Looking at it, this kind of suffered from the same issue my other tier list in the past I've made for like Genshin. The big thing that I've actually gotten comments still like 3 months later about the Genshin lore power tier list is I should have had more tiers, because I ended up with like just Elite Warrior, then Archon, so Scaramouche was in the same tier as like so many other high level vision wielders, and that tier was like 4 times the size of any other tier. When it comes to these other units, I gotta say I'm really excited for a lot of them. Virtuosa and Viviana, I think, are going to be super cool. Arts fighters are going, and guards in general will have a lot of competition with Surtur at the very least. But the general consensus I've seen on Viviana, she's okay, maybe upper middle. Virtuosa, I think, is supposed to be the rituals category, same as the 5-star welfare unit for IS4. And even though I don't think she's super strong, I actually think she's really fun to use, which makes me excited for Virtuosa, especially because, again, when you look at my top performer of class tier, I do not have a supporter or a caster here. And so ultimately, I would love to have a top performing 6-star supporter. I think the idea of doing the corrosion damage, or maybe it's not corrosion, but that type of damage to other enemies is really fun. I will say, however, the welfare unit hasn't been like super impressive in terms of damage, but I'm excited for that. I'm trying to remember, I've heard Hodor Kit's going to be fun. Breaker is another unit that's been anticipated for a long, long time. I think this is Ray. I've heard Ray could be a really fun unit, and I just love all the Sui siblings. I'm actually so bummed out I wasn't able to get Chongyue. At some point, maybe once I'm out of school, if I find a good job and have the money to whale, I'd consider sparking maybe Chongyue at some point if I could. But I'm actually really excited. I think she's the same class as Soraya, which is stiff competition. I've always felt like the Sui siblings have just been a weird niche like group, almost all of them. Again, I don't know enough about Chongyue, but Ling is Ling. Nian has such a weird, specific ability, especially with her S3. Dusk has almost infinite stall potential when skills up, but it's also very odd. But either way, I mean, this is my tier list. I'd love to hear anyone stopping by. I know a lot of people on these videos will just kind of look towards the end to see how things shook down. I'd love to hear your opinions. Again, all of this is anecdotal. I have yet to completely clear plus 15 on the third ending. I had it, I just threw it. It was just an instance where my finger literally slipped because I have an iPhone XR. I know the later iPhones did it. When you swipe up, it minimizes your screen to like swipe between apps. And it drives me insane because of the way Arknights works. But it was actually something like that with where because of the way I slipped, I didn't quite get the timing on the second DPS phase of the third boss, the black hole looking thing. And you have to be so specific that I literally left them with the sliver. It was actually on the first phase, because you have to kill it twice. It left him with a sliver on the first phase, which affected my second phase cycles and actually got me killed. I was super sad about it. But I'm still going to try for that. Again, I've done the first ending and the second ending a decent amount of times, and this is just generally my thoughts. I'd love to hear, though, what units you guys have used, how strong you've seen, if you've seen other tier lists from people much more knowledgeable than me in the game, that maybe play on the CN server. What do they use? Do they agree? Do they disagree? I know I've rated Gladia pretty high. I wonder how people feel about Reed Alter. Um, should I be rating some debuffers like Suzerain or, buffers like Sculpt or higher? I'm always open to discussion. Please don't be too rude. That's part of the reason why I sometimes avoid making videos is I just do this for fun. And it makes me a little sad to see people like arguing with each other in the comments. I've mentioned a few times on stream, but like on my potential like XPs in Genshin in the future from HI3, I had someone write like a 10 paragraph essay, just not even slamming me, just slamming the Genshin community about how the games aren't connected and stuff. And I even linked him like a small video of the CEO saying they were trying to build a meta universe with those games. And you just kind of like, it made me a little sad because ultimately, like, games are for fun. I don't make my living off of it. I really enjoy them, and I hope everyone else does too. But this is just my opinion. I've rambled on for a little bit at the end, but let me know what you guys think. Bye.